In this video, we're going to look at mid-side dynamics processing. In other words, what happens when we swap a stereo compressor for one capable of working with independent mid and side bands. Before we go any further, I'm just going to press play on this piece of music. So we've got three sounds here: a mono subsignal, a pretty wide flittery pad sound, and a breakbeat loop. And what we basically got is a lot of content which is shared between the two speakers and which is very mono compatible, which is the mid signal. And what we also have is lots of independent stuff happening on the left and right, which obviously will make up the side signal. Now, what I've got here is a couple of compressors waiting in the wings, and the first of those is a stereo compressor, which is the Oxford Dynamics module. And what I've done is to configure this with a high ratio and a low threshold and a lot of makeup gain so that we've got a roughly volume matched signal. But this is without any EQ, without any independent mid-side processing. This is just a stereo compressor working across the entire mix. So in a second, what I'm going to do is to press play again with this bypassed, and then we're going to punch it in the second time round, and we can hear the difference. And what we're particularly listening for is the stereo image, whether or not it's changed by the fact that we've got a single stereo compressor across the output of this group of sounds. And the answer is really clear, particularly as you can hear what happens when the bass stops at the end and the pad continues. What happens is the compressor has a chance to recover from the bass content, and we suddenly get an enormous amount more width as that recovers at the end, which is kind of telling us that we're losing width whilst this group of sounds is playing at the same time, which is no great surprise. So having done that little experiment, what we're going to do instead is to fire up Ozone and a patch in here, which we're going to start with, which is called, let's just scroll down here for a second, Richness and Depth. Now, this is just a sort of start point, but what this is doing is to load a compression solution which has independent mid and side portions. And so that we can hear exactly what we're dealing with, what Ozone lets us do is to solo these so that we can hear the side signal and the mid signal. And then we'll look at how we can configure the various parameters so that we can hear clearly how we can process the two things independently. So this is just the mid signal for a moment. And correspondingly, let's now listen to the side signal. So there you can hear very clearly that there's obviously different harmonic material present in the mid and the side signals. Much less bass in the sides, as you'd expect, much more of the pad. And so, of course, what this is going to give us a chance to do is to configure settings which are kind of better suited to the different components of the mid and side signals. So the way that this works, first of all, is that we can go into the mid band And we can see that at the moment we're working on one band of 4. This is effectively a multi-band compressor. But if we want to, we can press the All button, and then we get to see all 4 bands at once. So we can configure the frequency areas around which each of these is going to work. And then we've got a chance to decide how much compression and limiting to apply to each of these bands in turn. So having had a look at this basic preset, we're actually going to start from scratch and instead work with the default settings, which give us a completely sort of flat line. So if we come into the mid-side component again, and we just solo this for a moment, what we're going to do first of all is to get different frequency bands under control from a mid point of view before we start thinking about enhancing the side portion to make even more of the stereo width. So let's first of all configure some settings for the mid portion. So we've obviously thrown some settings together there quite quickly, but what you can see I've done in particular is to come to band 4, which is the high frequency band here, and just knock out some gain from here as well as providing a compression solution, because what I want to do is to make more of the volume that's attributed to this band when it comes to side processing. So let's come out of solo mode for a second and see how those settings sound now with both the mid and the sides parts playing together. Okay, so there's a lot more power in the original sort of bottom end of this mix. So I'm going to come back to band 1 for a moment and just to add a little bit of gain, which we're losing at the moment from the compression treatment. And the same thing here too. Okay, and for now that's working nicely. What I'm going to do here in the side portion is to solo this for a moment, but in particular I'm interested now, having selected the side element here, to have a look at what's happening towards the top end. There's going to be much less bass, in fact very little in the side portion, so it's more the top end that we're interested in looking to enhance. So what we've got now is quite an interesting situation where the mid portion is tougher, more under control, and is basically providing most of the weight of the mix. So it's very mono compatible. And what we've then got is this very shimmery texture, which is coming from the top end of the loop and from the pad in particular, which we're enhancing and making much wider. Now, obviously, remember that our stereo compressor was really struggling to deal with the width that was coming from a sort of one-size-fits-all solution. So in other words, trying to take that bass content and that treble content and trying to find a compromise there. Obviously, we lost stereo imaging as a result. With mid-side processing, we're enhancing it.